There are no coincidences in God's plan. If you are here reading this message, know that it is not by accident. This moment was orchestrated by God Himself, a divine appointment meant to reach you exactly when you needed it most. There are times in life when God speaks to us in whispers, gentle nudges, quiet reminders. But there are also times when He speaks with urgency, when the signs around us become too clear to ignore. This is one of those times. Perhaps you have felt it already, a stirring deep in your spirit, a persistent feeling that something must change. The exhaustion, the burden, the quiet ache of giving and never receiving, it has all led you to this moment. You may have questioned whether your struggles were simply part of life's trials, whether your sacrifices were noble, whether your endurance was an act of faith. But what if God has been trying to tell you something different? What if, instead of calling you to endure, He is calling you to awaken? God does not want you to live in a constant state of depletion. He does not desire for you to carry burdens that were never meant to be yours. The weight you feel pressing upon your heart, the sense that you are pouring into others while being left empty yourself, that is not what He intended for you. That is not the mark of a faithful servant. It is a sign that you have been pouring into the wrong vessels, giving away your light without being refilled by Him. When God calls His chosen ones, He does not call them to a life of endless exhaustion. He calls them to walk in purpose, to stand in alignment with His will, to shine so brightly that their very presence transforms the world around them. But how can you shine when you are drained? How can you step fully into your calling if you are constantly weighed down by people and situations that do nothing but take? This is your wake-up call. God is speaking to you now, urging you to pay attention. The signs are clear, the relationships that leave you exhausted, the endless cycles of giving without return, the feeling that no matter how much you do, it is never enough. These are not challenges sent to test your faith. They are warnings from God that it is time to let go. You were not meant to live like this. You were not created to be a never-ending source of strength for those who refuse to stand on their own. You were chosen for something greater. And now God is calling you to step into that purpose, not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Will you listen? Will you obey? Or will you continue down the path of exhaustion, ignoring the signs that God has placed before you? This is not just another moment, it is a turning point. God is calling His chosen ones to rise, to reclaim their strength, and to step into the life He has prepared for them. But it starts with you. It starts with the choice to finally listen. You have given so much of yourself, your time, your love, your energy. You have poured into others selflessly, believing that this is what love requires, what faithfulness looks like. You have carried burdens that were never yours to bear, convincing yourself that if you could just give a little more, endure a little longer, things would change. But now, standing here in the quiet moments of reflection, you can feel the weight of it all pressing down on you. The exhaustion is not just physical, it is spiritual. It is the deep, soul-weary kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. And if you are honest with yourself, you know that something is not right. God never intended for you to live like this. Somewhere along the way, you mistook sacrifice for love, endurance for faithfulness, depletion for righteousness. You told yourself that the pain was part of the journey, that the exhaustion was simply the cost of caring. But God is whispering to you now, asking you to look deeper. What if the emptiness you feel is not a test of your strength, but a warning? What if, instead of proving your devotion, you have been slowly surrendering your joy? What if, by constantly pouring into others, you have been neglecting the sacred responsibility of caring for your own soul? There is beauty in giving, there is holiness in serving, but true giving, the kind that is blessed by God, does not leave you broken. It does not drain you to the point of emptiness. The Bible tells us that when we give, it should be out of the overflow of our hearts, not from a place of depletion. God's design for generosity is not one that leaves His chosen ones exhausted and forgotten. He has called you to be a light in this world. But how can a light shine when it has been drained of its fire? Think about the way Jesus gave. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and taught those who sought wisdom. But even in His boundless compassion, He set boundaries. There were times when He withdrew from the crowds, when He stepped away to pray, to rest, to be renewed by the Father. He did not allow Himself to be drained by those who only sought miracles, but had no desire to change. He did not chase after those who rejected Him. Even when He stood before the rich young ruler, offering him the path to eternal life, He did not beg him to stay when he turned away. Jesus understood a truth that so many of us struggle with. Not everyone is meant to receive what we have to give. Not everyone will value the love, the kindness, the sacrifices we offer. And when that happens, it is not our duty to keep giving. It is our duty to let go. Yet you have convinced yourself that it is different for you. That if you just try harder, love deeper, give more, the people in your life will finally see your worth. You have endured relationships that drain you, friendships that leave you feeling unseen, commitments that weigh heavily on your spirit. You have continued to give even when your heart whispered that it was too much. But God is telling you now that this is not the path He intended for you. He is asking you to pay attention to the exhaustion, to the quiet ache in your soul. This is not love. This is not faith. This is self-betrayal. God has never asked you to destroy yourself for the sake of others. Nowhere in Scripture does He command you to give until there is nothing left of you. He calls you to love, yes, but He also calls you to wisdom, to discernment, to a life where your giving is not one-sided, where your love is not taken for granted. You were never meant to be someone's endless source of strength while they refuse to carry their own weight. You were never meant to keep sacrificing yourself for those who will never do the same for you. But letting go is not easy, is it? There is a part of you that clings to the hope that one day the people who have drained you will realize what you have done for them. That one day they will turn around and finally see your worth. But what if that day never comes? What if, by holding on to them, you are not only hurting yourself, but also standing in the way of what God is trying to do in their lives? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to step back. Some people will only grow when they are forced to stand on their own. Some will only learn responsibility when they no longer have someone carrying them. And some, no matter how much you love them, how deeply you pour into them, will never change at all. That is not your fault. It is not your burden to bear. God sees what you have given. He sees the tears you have cried in secret, the nights you have spent praying for others while neglecting yourself. He sees how much you have sacrificed, and He is saying, enough. You were not created to live in a state of constant exhaustion. You were not placed on this earth to be used by those who do not value you. You were chosen for something greater. The time has come for you to reclaim your strength, to stop giving endlessly to those who take and take but never pour back into you, to stop believing that love means losing yourself, to stop waiting for others to see your worth and start seeing it for yourself. When you finally choose yourself, something shifts. The heaviness lifts. The exhaustion begins to fade. You start to see clearly what you could not before, that you were never meant to live this way, that God has been calling you to something more, something greater, something that will finally bring you peace. So now the choice is yours. Will you continue on this path, allowing yourself to be drained until there is nothing left of you? Or will you listen to the voice of God as He calls you into something new? Will you trust that when you release what is breaking you, He will fill the empty spaces with something better? This is not just another message. This is a divine wake-up call. The signs are clear. God is speaking to you, urging you to pay attention. The exhaustion, the weariness, the quiet pain in your heart, these are not random. They are God's way of telling you that it is time to let go, that it is time to walk away from what no longer serves you and step into the fullness of the life He has prepared for you. You were not meant to live in exhaustion. You were not created to be drained by those who refuse to change. You were chosen to stand in your power, to walk in the purpose God has set before you. And now, in this moment, you must decide, will you continue carrying burdens that were never meant to be yours? Or will you finally listen to the voice of God and step into the life you were always meant to live? There is a powerful truth that many struggle to accept. Not everyone you give to will appreciate your sacrifice. Not everyone you pour into will value your kindness. There are people in your life who will take and take, never once stopping to consider the cost of your generosity. And yet, you continue. You convince yourself that if you just love them a little harder, if you are just a little more patient, if you keep forgiving, one day they will change. But deep in your heart, you know the truth. Some people will never change, not because they cannot, but because they refuse to. And as long as you keep shielding them from the consequences of their own actions, they will never have a reason to grow. It is a painful realization, one that cuts deep. You have built your life on the belief that kindness will always be returned, that love will always be recognized, that your sacrifices will one day be repaid. But what happens when they are not? What happens when the people you have given so much to continue to take you for granted? What happens when they begin to expect your love, your effort, your devotion, without ever giving the same in return? God sees what you have been through. He sees the way you have carried others when they refused to stand on their own. He sees the nights you have spent in prayer, asking for wisdom, asking for strength, asking for a sign that your love is not in vain. And today He is speaking to you. This is not just another moment of frustration, not just another season of exhaustion. This is God showing you that the time has come to step away. Letting go does not mean you do not love them. It does not mean you do not care. It does not mean you are giving up on them. It simply means you are choosing to stop carrying burdens that were never yours to bear. Some people are meant to walk through struggle in order to find their own strength. Some people will only turn to God when they have nowhere else to go. But if you keep stepping in, if you keep catching them before they fall, if you keep cleaning up their messes, they will never face the lessons that God is trying to teach them. You are not their savior. You were never meant to be. That role belongs to God alone, and the longer you try to play it, the longer you delay not only their growth, but also your own. You are exhausted, not because you lack faith, but because you have carried too much for too long. You have mistaken endurance for obedience, thinking that if you just keep going, God will somehow bless your suffering. But God does not bless what He never intended for you to carry. He does not ask you to live in a state of constant depletion. He calls you to a life of peace, of balance, of wisdom. Consider the story of Jonah. When Jonah ran from God's calling, a great storm arose, threatening to destroy the entire ship carrying him. The sailors on board were terrified, doing everything they could to survive. But Jonah knew the truth. The storm was not meant for them. It was meant for him. Only when they threw Jonah overboard did the sea finally calm. Some of you are experiencing storms that were never meant for you. You are fighting battles that are not yours to fight. You are weighed down, not because of your own choices, but because you are carrying people who are out of alignment with God's will. And as long as you keep holding on, the storm will not pass. God is calling you to release them, to trust that He will deal with them in His own way, in His own time. But what about the guilt? What about the fear that if you walk away, they will struggle, that they will be lost without you, that they will think you have abandoned them? Those thoughts are the chains that keep you bound. They are the lies that keep you trapped in cycles of exhaustion. But listen closely. God is not asking you to abandon them. He is asking you to surrender them, to place them in His hands, knowing that He is the only one who can truly change hearts. If you continue to pour into people who refuse to change, you will never have the energy to fulfill the purpose God has for you. If you keep draining yourself for those who take you for granted, you will never step into the life of joy, peace, and abundance that God has prepared for you. Think about the story of Abraham and Lot. For years, Abraham and Lot traveled together, their lives intertwined. But as time passed, conflict arose between their people. The land could no longer sustain them both. Abraham, with wisdom and discernment, knew that it was time to separate. He did not beg Lot to stay. He did not try to fix the situation by continuing in an arrangement that no longer served them. Instead, he let Lot go. Lot, seeking what looked like the best opportunity, chose the land that appeared most prosperous. But what he did not realize was that in doing so, he was walking straight into disaster. He settled near Sodom, a place of wickedness, and eventually had to be rescued from destruction. But here is the most important part. Only after Lot was gone did God reaffirm his promise to Abraham. Only after Abraham released what was no longer meant for him did God show him the fullness of the blessings he had in store. Some of you are holding on to people and situations that are preventing you from stepping into your promised land. You are carrying relationships, obligations, and responsibilities that were never meant to go with you into your next season. And as long as you continue to hold on, you will remain stuck. God is calling you to trust Him, to believe that if He is asking you to let go, it is because He has something better waiting for you. But you cannot receive what is coming if your hands are still full of what was never meant to stay. You must choose. Will you continue to pour yourself into people who do not value you, or will you step into the life God has prepared for you? Will you keep waiting for someone to change when they have no desire to grow, or will you finally walk away? This is not an easy choice. Walking away from people you love, from relationships you have invested in, from commitments you have fought for. It will hurt. It will feel like betrayal. But it is not. It is an act of faith. It is an act of obedience. It is trusting that God's plans for you are greater than anything you are leaving behind. So today, make the choice. Choose to stop breaking yourself for people who would never do the same for you. Choose to stop giving your light to those who only seek to extinguish it. Choose to trust that when you let go, God will step in. This is your moment. This is your turning point. The signs have been clear. God is speaking to you. Will you listen? Or will you continue to ignore the warning until there is nothing left of you? You are not meant to be drained. You are not meant to be used. You are meant to shine. And the only way to shine is to finally step into the life God has been calling you to all along. There is a moment in every believer's life when God speaks so clearly that ignoring Him is no longer an option. It is not always a loud voice or a dramatic sign. Sometimes it is the quiet realization that you have been giving endlessly to people who do not value your love. It is the awareness that your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, that your sacrifices have been taken for granted, that no matter how much you pour into certain relationships, they remain empty, and yet you stay. You convince yourself that walking away is selfish, that enduring a little longer is the right thing to do. But deep down, something inside of you knows the truth. You were not created to live like this. God never intended for you to be drained. He never designed you to be someone's endless source of strength while they refuse to carry their own burdens. And yet you find yourself stuck in a cycle of exhaustion, mistaking suffering for faithfulness. You tell yourself that love requires patience, that kindness means always being available, that being a good person means giving without expecting anything in return. But what if this belief is keeping you in bondage? What if, instead of being a reflection of God's will, it is a sign that you have been ignoring His voice? The exhaustion you feel is not just physical, it is spiritual. It is the kind of weariness that seeps into your soul, leaving you feeling empty, no matter how much you pray, how much you give, how much you try to push through. You see, true giving, the kind that aligns with God's purpose, does not leave you depleted. Love, when it is real, does not strip you of your joy. Generosity, when it is blessed by God, does not leave you questioning your worth. So why do you feel so drained? Why do you feel as though no matter how much you do, it is never enough? The answer is simple. You have been giving in places where your giving was never meant to be. There is a difference between helping someone and enabling them. There is a difference between supporting someone's growth and carrying them when they refuse to walk. And yet, time and time again, you have taken on burdens that were never yours to bear. You have held on to relationships that only brought you pain, friendships that left you empty, commitments that no longer aligned with God's plan for your life. And the longer you stay in these situations, the more you block the blessings that God is trying to bring into your life. God sees everything. He sees the ones who only come to you when they need something but disappear when you need them. He sees the ones who take your love for granted, who assume that no matter how they treat you, you will always be there. He sees the weight you have carried, the silent battles, the unspoken pain, the moments when you have questioned whether your kindness was worth it, and He is saying, "Enough. You were not created to be used. You were not meant to live in a constant state of depletion. You were not called to carry others while neglecting yourself." Think about the story of Jonah. When he ran from God's calling, he boarded a ship heading in the wrong direction, and a great storm arose. The sailors on board, innocent men who had nothing to do with Jonah's disobedience, found themselves in danger because they were carrying someone who was out of alignment with God's will. Only when they threw Jonah overboard did the sea finally calm. Some of you are experiencing storms that were never meant for you. You are suffering not because of your own choices, but because you are holding on to people that God has asked you to release. You are trying to rescue those who need to face their own journey, and in doing so you are absorbing consequences that were never meant for you. Letting go is not abandonment. It is not a lack of love. It is trusting that God's plan for someone else is not yours to control. It is trusting that when you step back, God will step in. You see, some people will never change as long as you continue to carry them. They will never grow as long as you keep shielding them from the consequences of their actions. And they will never truly appreciate your presence until they have experienced your absence. God is calling you to protect your energy, to stop giving endlessly to people who refuse to value what you offer, to stop sacrificing yourself for those who would never do the same for you, to stop believing that love means breaking yourself for the sake of others. Jesus himself had boundaries. He loved all, but he did not entrust himself to all. He gave freely, but he also withdrew when it was necessary. He healed many, but he did not chase after those who rejected him. So why do you? Why do you continue to pour yourself out for people who only take and never give? There is a sacred law woven into the fabric of life. What you give out will return to you, either in blessings or in consequences. And if your giving has left you broken, weary, and questioning your own worth, it is time to reassess where your energy is going. God does not call his chosen ones to live in constant exhaustion. He calls them to walk in strength, in wisdom, in alignment with his will. Think about Abraham and Lot. For years they traveled together, but as their blessings grew, so did the conflict between them. Abraham, with wisdom and discernment, knew that it was time to part ways. He did not beg Lot to stay. He did not try to hold on to a relationship that no longer served its purpose. Instead, he let him go. And only after Lot was gone did God reveal the full extent of his promise to Abraham. Some of you are holding on to people and situations that are preventing you from stepping into your blessings. You are clinging to relationships that were only meant for a season, and as long as you continue to hold on, you will never see the fullness of what God has prepared for you. God is asking you to trust him, to trust that when he tells you to release something, it is for your good, to trust that when he asks you to walk away, it is because he has something better ahead. But he cannot bless you with new opportunities, new relationships, new joy, if your hands are still full of what was never meant to stay. So now the choice is yours. Will you continue to pour yourself into people who do not appreciate you? Will you continue to sacrifice your well-being for those who take you for granted? Will you keep giving your energy to those who only seek to drain you? Or will you finally listen to God's voice and step into the life He has prepared for you? This is not just another message. This is your wake-up call. The signs have been clear. The exhaustion you feel, the way certain relationships leave you feeling empty, the quiet whisper in your spirit telling you that something needs to change. These are not coincidences. They are God's way of telling you that it is time to let go, that it is time to reclaim your energy, that it is time to step into the fullness of His calling for your life. You were not created to live in depletion. You were not chosen to be used and discarded. You were meant to shine, to thrive, to walk in strength. And the only way to do that is to finally release what is holding you back. The moment you choose yourself, the moment you trust that God's plans for you are greater than what you are leaving behind, everything will change. The heaviness will lift. The confusion will fade. And for the first time in a long time, you will feel free. The signs are clear. God is speaking to you. Will you listen? There comes a point in life when you must ask yourself a difficult but necessary question. Is what I am giving truly making a difference? Or am I simply pouring into a well that refuses to be filled? You have spent years believing that your love, your kindness, and your sacrifices would eventually be recognized. You have held on to the hope that if you continued to give selflessly, the people you poured into would one day turn around and see your worth. But deep in your heart, you have felt the slow realization creeping in. Some people will never see it. No matter how much you love them, no matter how much you sacrifice, they will never change, never reciprocate, never truly value what you give. And that truth, as painful as it is something you can no longer ignore. God sees your heart. He knows how deeply you care, how much you have given, how much you have endured in the name of love, but He also sees the weight that has settled on your spirit, the exhaustion, the quiet disappointment, the feeling of being unseen and unappreciated. He sees how you have convinced yourself that this is what love is supposed to feel like, heavy, burdensome, depleting. But that is not love. That is not faith. That is not what God has called you to. There is a difference between giving from a place of love and giving from a place of obligation. Love uplifts, it strengthens, it nourishes both the giver and the receiver. But what you have been experiencing is not love, it is depletion. It is giving until there is nothing left of you, only to realize that those you have given to never intended to pour back into you. And if you are honest with yourself, you know that this cycle has been breaking you. God never called you to be drained. He never asked you to be someone's emotional crutch, someone's constant source of strength while they refuse to stand on their own. Yes, He calls us to be generous, to be compassionate, to love one another. But nowhere in Scripture does He command us to sacrifice our own well-being for people who do not honor, respect, or value what we give. True love does not come at the cost of your own soul. True generosity does not leave you empty. True faithfulness does not mean tolerating relationships that do nothing but break you. You must understand this. Not everyone is meant to receive what you have to offer. Not everyone deserves access to your heart, your time, your energy. There are people in your life who see your kindness as something to be used, not cherished. There are people who only come to you when they need something but vanish the moment you need them. There are people who take your loyalty for granted, assuming that no matter how they treat you, you will always be there. And as long as you allow this, they will never change. God has been trying to get your attention. He has been showing you the signs. The exhaustion, the one-sided relationships, the lingering feeling that you are giving too much and receiving too little. He has been whispering to you, urging you to set boundaries, to protect your energy, to stop mistaking depletion for devotion. But have you been listening? Or have you been convincing yourself that if you just try a little harder, if you just endure a little longer, things will get better? This is where faith comes in. Faith is not just about believing in God. It is about trusting Him enough to let go of what is hurting you. It is about surrendering the relationships, the responsibilities, the situations that are weighing you down, believing that God has something better for you on the other side. Because He does. But you will never see it as long as you keep holding on to what He is asking you to release. Think about the story of the prodigal son. The father loved his son deeply, but when the son chose to walk away, he did not chase after him. He did not beg him to stay. He did not try to force him to make better choices. He let him go. And it was only after the son had experienced the consequences of his own actions that he returned, not because his father had forced him to, but because he had finally come to understand the value of what he had lost. Some people in your life will only appreciate your presence when they experience your absence, and some never will, no matter how much time passes. Either way, your job is not to force them to value you. Your job is to walk in obedience to what God is telling you. And if He is telling you to step back, to stop carrying what was never meant to be yours, then that is exactly what you need to do. Letting go is not an act of cruelty. It is not a lack of love. It is wisdom. It is self-respect. It is recognizing that you deserve relationships that pour into you as much as you pour into them. It is understanding that your worth is not dependent on how much you endure, but on the fact that you are a child of God, chosen and loved, worthy of peace, joy, and fulfillment. So what will you do? Will you continue to exhaust yourself for people who refuse to change? Will you keep sacrificing your well-being for those who only take from you? Or will you finally listen to what God has been telling you all along? This is not just another moment of frustration. This is not just another season of weariness. This is a divine wake-up call. God is speaking to you, and the signs have never been clearer. The exhaustion you feel is not random, it is a message. The way certain relationships leave you feeling empty is not a coincidence. It is a warning. The quiet longing in your heart for something more is not wishful thinking. It is God calling you to step into the life He has prepared for you. But He cannot bring you into that life as long as you keep clinging to what is draining you. He cannot bless you with the relationships, the peace, the joy you are meant to have as long as your hands are still full of what He is asking you to release. This is your moment of choice. Will you keep waiting for people to change when they have no desire to grow? Will you keep breaking yourself in the name of love, even when that love is not returned? Or will you finally trust that when God says, "Let go," it is because He has something better waiting for you? You were not created to live in exhaustion. You were not chosen to be used and discarded. You were meant to walk in strength, in purpose, in divine alignment. And the only way to do that is to finally choose yourself, not out of selfishness, but out of obedience. The moment you make that choice, everything will change. The weight will lift, the exhaustion will fade, the peace that has been missing from your life will return, and for the first time in a long time, you will feel free. God is speaking to you. He has been speaking for a long time. The only question left is, will you listen? There is a moment when the exhaustion becomes too heavy to ignore. It is not just physical tiredness, not just the kind that a good night's sleep can fix. It is something deeper, something that lingers in your spirit, weighing you down in ways you cannot fully explain. It is the feeling of constantly pouring into others while receiving nothing in return. The quiet ache of being unseen, of being taken for granted, of wondering if anyone truly values all that you do. You tell yourself that this is just a season, that things will get better, that if you keep pushing through, one day it will all make sense. But what if this is not just a difficult season? What if this is a warning? God never intended for you to live in a state of depletion. He never called you to give so much that you have nothing left for yourself. And yet, you have convinced yourself that endurance is a sign of faith, that sacrifice is the price of love, that constantly putting others before yourself is what it means to be a good person. But is it really? Does God truly ask you to live like this? Or have you mistaken self-neglect for righteousness? There is a difference between giving from a place of love and giving from a place of obligation. Love is life-giving. It nourishes both the giver and the receiver. But what you have been experiencing is not love. It is exhaustion disguised as devotion. It is the slow erosion of your spirit in the name of kindness. It is a cycle that leaves you feeling empty, unappreciated, and questioning your own worth. That is not the kind of life God has called you to. The exhaustion you feel is not a sign that you are weak. It is not proof that you are failing. It is a message from God, a divine signal that something needs to change. But change is difficult, isn't it? Walking away from relationships that drain you, setting boundaries with people who expect you to always be available, choosing yourself after years of believing that self-sacrifice is noble. These things are not easy, but just because something is difficult does not mean it is not necessary.